When I saw the neighbor's son holding his tool and calling me, I couldn't resist, and I went over right away. Hello to everyone who follows the channel and welcome to the channel Infidelity Stories. My name is Eliana, I'm married, and today I'm going to share a story that I lived while working as a doctor on one of my father's farms. It was there that I met the son of my mother's housekeeper. He was always very shy, and I never imagined anything could happen between us. Marcos had something about him that moved me, something big, let's just say a very big tool. I'm sure you get the idea. Being alone as I was, it was impossible to ignore. Let me introduce myself properly. I live in Goiás, but my family is from Rio de Janeiro. I have a very calm life. My parents own businesses throughout the state and even beyond, so I never experienced any financial hardship. I'm a fake blonde, though my mother is a natural blonde. I have 2 younger sisters. I'm 28 years old, and last year I finished my medical degree, which I studied in Argentina. That's also where I met my husband. We got married in the middle of last year. He's a professional photographer, and he's from Argentina, blonde with blue eyes. He was someone who helped me a lot while I was there. I haven't described myself yet. I'm short, about 1.60, 5'3". I keep up with daily walks. I was raised in a Catholic household, so I had very few intimate experiences in my youth, always afraid of my parents, especially my mother. But I had a few boyfriends in high school, with some hidden make-out sessions, but nothing beyond a kiss here and there or some innocent touching. My dream was to study medicine, but my insecurity and the pressure from my parents hindered me a lot when it came to college entrance exams, so I didn't get into any schools in Brazil. But then, an opportunity arose for me to go to Argentina and study there. Since money wasn't an issue, I didn't think twice. It was also an opportunity for a little freedom, especially from my mother, who was always breathing down my neck and demanding results in everything. I had some psychological issues because of that, but I never blamed her. She's my mother, but it was hard. I moved to Argentina with a friend and lived with her during the first half of medical school. I used to go out a lot with her, but later I pulled back and focused more on studying to achieve my dream. During the second half of my course, I met my current husband, Gabriel. I met him at a bar in Buenos Aires. We got to know each other, and with each passing day, I fell more in love with him. I lost my virginity to him. He was very caring with me, and that's when I realized he was the man of my life. We started dating, and he came back with me to Brazil, met my parents, and we traveled a bit as well. Eventually, he proposed to me at the beginning of last year, and in December, we got married here in Brazil. We had our honeymoon in Greece, and it was beautiful. When we returned, I wanted to take some time off to rest and figure out what I wanted to do next. But then I received an invitation from my mother to work at a private hospital in Goiás. I didn't know what to do because I had just finished medical school and I wanted to enjoy time with my husband and our dogs. Besides, we'd have to move to Brazil since we were living in Buenos Aires. I was very confused about what to do. My husband was very patient and told me to take my time and that we'd decide together. A week later, Gabriel received an invitation to do a photography course at a prestigious institute in Europe. He'd have to spend 2 months there. This course was a major career milestone for him, and I was the first to tell him he should go, that it was his dream. He had been waiting for this opportunity for years, so he talked to me about how we could manage things. He'd go to Europe, and during that time, I'd handle our move to Brazil. I was unsure at first, but he reassured me that he loved me and wanted to support my medical career. Plus, after his course, he'd easily find a job in Brazil. A week later, he was already in Europe, and I was in Goiás at one of my parents' farms. I took the opportunity to relax because so many things had been happening in the past few years, especially in that last week. It wasn't long before my mother approached me about the hospital job, saying it was a golden opportunity for my career and a unique experience. I talked to her and then called one of her friends, who explained how things worked. She asked if my diploma was valid in Brazil, and I told her I had taken the exam before my wedding, and thank God everything was fine. However, she asked if I had any real hospital experience, and I had to admit that I didn't, just internships during medical school. She told me that the internships were important, but that I'd need some post-graduation experience to be hired. She suggested I do volunteer work for at least a month, and that would be enough to get me admitted to the hospital, but she warned me not to delay too much because she couldn't hold the position for long. When I got home, I talked to my mother, and she suggested I volunteer at community clinics. I wasn't sure, so I called Gabriel and explained everything. He listened and then said, "Why don't you go to a different city? Your parents have some farms in the interior of the state." I asked him why he thought that was a good idea, as it might complicate things between us. Gabriel, as calm as ever, responded, "It may seem that way, but I know how much your mother pressures you. It could be a chance for you to handle things on your own. Besides, you're very capable, dedicated, and intelligent." He always knew how to encourage me. That's when I remembered that my parents owned a farm in the northern part of the state, near Quilombola communities, that needed doctors from time to time. I reached out to contacts in the area and quickly resolved things, partly due to my parents' indirect influence, but also because of the community's needs. Soon, everything was set up, and in a week I'd be travelling to the farm to start my family care services at a small community clinic within a Quilombola community of about 100 people. I felt happy because it seemed peaceful, so few people to care for. But I had some apprehension as I didn't know much about their customs or if they'd have any prejudice towards me. I told my mother and she was a bit upset with me, but I didn't give much attention to that. I went to speak with my father to ask if anyone was living on the farm, and he told me that a man and his family were taking care of the place. He assured me that the people there were very welcoming, which gave me some peace of mind. It would be a good opportunity to reflect on my life and also to help those in need, especially people living so far from the city. Soon, I was arriving at the farm, which was beautiful. I was warmly welcomed by Aldemir, a 60-year-old dark-skinned man, who lived there with his wife and 5 children, though only their youngest son, Marcos, who was 24, still lived with them. They also belonged to the Quilombola community I'd be working with. They were very kind, telling me it was a blessing that I had come to help because they hadn't had a doctor for over 3 months, and it was hard to get to the city just for medical care. I felt relieved, as it seemed like I would be well received by everyone. The farm was 7 kilometers, about 4 miles from the community, and 15 kilometers, about 9 miles from the nearest town. It was a beautiful place with waterfalls, orchards, gardens, and plenty of sunshine. I realized I might struggle with the heat, as I was used to the cold in Argentina. I organized my things with the help of Mrs. Miriam, who would be helping with cooking and household chores, while her husband and son took care of the farm's animals and crops. The next day, I took the car to the community. My work supervisor was waiting there to give me instructions. When I arrived, I saw how small the community was. Simple houses, simple people, with some of the elders sitting on their doorsteps talking. The community had a small grocery store, a bar, a 2-room school, a clinic, a church, and a small house that served meals. Everything seemed very peaceful. The people were always smiling, and the whole place had a light, relaxed atmosphere. At the clinic, Angela, my supervisor, explained everything: the hours, the special patients where the medication stock was kept. She also told me that I'd have to do night shifts at least twice a week or sleep in the community in case of emergencies, as there wasn't much medical assistance nearby. But she reassured me that I'd have help from an assistant, so I wouldn't feel lost. The only issue was that only one cell phone carrier worked in that area, and it wasn't mine, so I'd have to use a landline or a payphone to communicate. That made me a little sad, since I wouldn't be able to talk to my husband except when I was back at the farm. I gathered everything I needed, loaded it into my car, and returned to the farm. I had to get organized because in 2 days, I would begin my volunteer work. Back at the farm, I called my husband and told him everything that was happening. I told him I was happy and excited about this new phase in my life, that I had chosen medicine to help people, but I never imagined there were so many in need of help. He said that things were going well for him too, though he missed me. I reassured him that soon we'd have plenty of time to be together. I also told my parents, and they were happy, especially my father. My mother was still a little annoyed as she thought I was getting my hands dirty with this volunteer work. My father, however, encouraged me to explore the farm while I had time before starting my work. Mrs. Miriam prepared a wonderful dinner for me, and I asked her if she could show me around the farm the next day. She told me, "Oh, Eliana, I can't go with you, but my son Marcos can take you. He knows the farm very well." "Okay then, Mrs. Miriam, I'll wait for him tomorrow at 10 a.m., I said. She smiled and replied, "He won't let you down. Don't worry. And thank you again for helping our community. It was so abandoned without medical care." I felt a little embarrassed, but told her there was no need to thank me, as I was really enjoying helping those who needed care. That night, I slept deeply, tired from driving on those dirt roads. I woke up the next morning to a knock on my door. It was Mrs. Miriam calling out, "Eliana, are you still planning to tour the farm?" I looked at the clock. It was already 10:15 a.m. I had completely forgotten about the tour. "I'm on my way, Mrs. Miriam, just a minute." I jumped out of bed, took a quick shower, and put on light, comfortable clothes as it was quite hot. I grabbed my hat and headed to the kitchen, where I found Marcos, Mrs. Miriam's son, waiting for me. When I entered, he looked down at the floor, avoiding eye contact. His mother, noticing his shyness, said, "Marcos is a bit timid. Sorry for his manners, dear. Marcos, lift your head and greet the lady." He raised his head slightly and mumbled a soft, "Good morning." I smiled, finding his awkwardness a bit cute. We left for the farm tour, each of us on horseback. Marcos was guiding me through the property, showing me the beautiful scenery. The farm was full of vegetation, fruit trees, and fields of soy and corn. There was a gorgeous river and, to my surprise, a stunning waterfall that I promised myself I'd come back to visit. Marcos showed me everything with short comments, avoiding much eye contact. When I looked at my watch, it was already lunchtime, so I suggested we head back. As we were on our way back, a sudden heavy rainstorm hit. We rushed to put the horses in the stable and took shelter ourselves, still a bit far from the house. While waiting for the rain to stop, I noticed that my shirt had become very see-through, clearly revealing more than I intended. When I caught Marcos looking at me, his eyes fixed on my body, he quickly looked down and ran ahead. Not wanting to get too wet, I hurried after him. Once back inside the house, I headed straight to my room to take a hot shower and change into dry clothes. At lunch, I chatted with Mrs. Miriam, and soon after, Marcos came in. The moment he saw me, he stood frozen, then quickly turned and left the room. Mrs. Miriam sighed and said, "I apologize for him again. He's very closed off and sometimes comes across as rude, but it's just his shyness." "It's no problem at all," I reassured her. "It's normal, especially since I'm still a stranger to him." During lunch, Mrs. Miriam asked me if I had a chance to see the waterfall. I told her that we hadn't had time to stop. "That's a shame. Why don't you go tomorrow then, Eliana? It'll be a good way to relax before starting your work. I'll ask Marcos to take you there again tomorrow. Don't forget to bring a swimsuit. The water is delightful." Smiling, I agreed. "That sounds like a great idea to unwind before I start work. I'll be sure to go." After lunch, I took a nap and later spent some time preparing things for my first day at the clinic. In the late afternoon, I wandered around the farm, admiring the animals. There were some stunning horses that looked like they belonged in movies. I couldn't help but wonder why my father had never brought me here before. I was walking slowly when I heard a soft sound coming from the back of the stables. Curious, I walked over quietly, and what I saw shocked me. It was Marcos, clearly relieving himself there, and I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. His tool was enormous, and I could see, well, let's just say it was a sight I wouldn't forget. I quickly left the scene, my heart racing, and headed straight for my room. The image wouldn't leave my mind, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, I didn't see Marcos at dinner, which was a relief, as I wouldn't have been able to look him in the eyes. After eating, I took a long, relaxing bath and went to bed. However, during the night, I had a dream about that tool, and when I woke up, my body was hot. and I felt a burning sensation inside me. I took a cold shower to cool down and clear my head before heading down for breakfast. At the table, Mrs. Miriam greeted me warmly, as always. Shortly after, Marcos appeared. The moment he saw me, he froze, his eyes scanning me from head to toe. His mother interrupted, "Son, greet the lady properly." He gave a small nod and mumbled a greeting. To break the awkwardness, I smiled and said, "Marcos, are you taking me to the waterfall today?" He choked slightly and quickly responded, "Of course, I'll go get the horses ready." While I finished my breakfast, Mrs. Miriam asked if she could speak to me about something. "Eliana, could I ask you for a favor? It's about my son." "Sure, what's wrong? Is he sick?" I asked, a bit concerned. "Thank God, no. But he's been very withdrawn lately, barely talking to us and eating very little. Since you're a doctor, I thought maybe you could help. I'm worried it might become something more serious down the road." Touched by her concern, I replied, "I understand your worries, Mrs. Miriam. Even though it's not my area of expertise, I'll try to talk to him and see what I can do. If necessary, I can take him to town for a consultation." Her face lit up with gratitude. "Thank you so much, Eliana. Things are tough here, and we'll pay you for any help you can give." "There's no need to pay, Mrs. Miriam. I'm happy to help, especially since you've been so kind to me here." After breakfast, I went upstairs to change into something comfortable for the trip to the waterfall. I grabbed my swimsuit, thinking of the cool water, and headed to the stables where Marcos was waiting for me. He was staring again, and I could feel the tension growing, but I brushed it off. "Ready to go, Marcos?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. "You don't have to be so formal with me. I'm only a few years older than you." I reached out my hand for a proper introduction. "Hi, I'm Eliana." He hesitated, but finally shook my hand, saying quietly, "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Eliana." We rode through the farm's historical areas, places that had once been occupied by enslaved people. It was fascinating, though bittersweet, and I found myself lost in thought. The weather was pleasant, and I asked, "Are we going to the waterfall?" "Yes, we are, Mrs. Eliana," he replied with a small smile, the first real sign of openness I'd seen from him. We arrived at the waterfall, and the place was even more beautiful than I had imagined. The sunlight filtered through the trees, making the water sparkle. It was truly magical. We tied up the horses, and I quickly took off my shoes and shorts, eager to get into the cool water. Marcos tried to call me back, but I was already stepping into the water when I slipped on a rock and fell hard into the water. I panicked, swallowing water, and started flailing. But suddenly, I felt strong hands grab me from behind and pull me to safety. It was Marcos who had jumped in to save me. I coughed and gasped for breath, feeling embarrassed, but grateful. When I looked up, I saw Marcos staring at me, wide-eyed. Glancing down at myself, I realized that one of my swimsuit straps had come undone, exposing more than I intended. I quickly adjusted it and smiled at him. "Thank you for saving me, Marcos." He looked away, blushing. "I was calling out to you, Mrs. Eliana, to warn you about the slippery rocks." I noticed the large bulge in his shorts, and a wave of heat surged through me. I tried to divert my thoughts and teased, "I'm always a little clumsy, and this place is so beautiful that I wasn't paying attention. But thank you for rescuing me." Marcos avoided looking directly at me, and I could see how nervous he was. To break the tension, I said, "Why don't you join me in the water? Your clothes are already wet, so you might as well enjoy the cool water." At first, he hesitated, but I insisted, telling him I'd explain everything to his mother. He eventually gave in and got into the water with me. I called him closer, asking him to help me avoid slipping again, and as I grabbed his hands for support, I couldn't help but feel the tension building between us. We continued swimming, and soon we were laughing and splashing water at each other, the awkwardness fading away. But every time I looked at him, I noticed how he kept glancing at me, and I couldn't help but notice his body, the way his wet clothes clung to him, and the tension in the air. We spent the next few minutes swimming, and I couldn't deny that something more was brewing between us. The playful atmosphere, quickly shifted when I saw his bulge again, more prominent than ever. As we got out of the water to dry off, I caught him staring at me again, and it was clear what was on his mind. I found myself thinking about what I had seen the other day and felt a rush of desire. I hadn't planned for this to happen, but it was becoming harder to ignore. I needed to make a decision soon, before things went too far. Let me know in the comments what I should do. Take advantage and leave your like, and remember to subscribe to the channel by activating the Tinkerbell to receive notification every time